We all have that little voice in the back of our heads when we click accept cookies or download some new app.
Oh, yeah. The constant low-level anxiety.
Right. We worry about big tech companies tracking what we buy or, where we go or what we search for late at night.
Right. There's always this fear that our digital footprint is just out there, quietly being used to serve us targeted ads.
Exactly. But what if the reality was actually so much darker and yet bizarrely so much more chaotic than just some algorithm trying to sell you running shoes?
Yeah, what if it wasn't a corporation at all?
Right. What if a random neighbor holding a grudge or, I don't know, a petty stammer or an investigative journalist could just buy your entire life history, from your bank balance to your extramarital affairs, literally with one single click on their phone?
It sounds like a dystopian sci-fi movie, honestly. Yeah. But as we're going to see today, in some places it is a very mundane daily reality.
It really is. So our mission today for this deep dive is to explore the true mechanical nature of Russia's digital surveillance state. And we are pulling exclusively from a really fascinating interview with investigative journalist Andrei Zakharov.
Yeah, he spent years covering this specific space.
He has. And real quick, because we're dealing with, highly charged geopolitical sources today, and to be totally clear to you listening, we're taking no sides here.
None at all.
We're not endorsing any political viewpoints, any actors, anything like that. We are strictly impartially reporting on the factual claims and ideas presented by the journalist in the source material. We just want to understand the data architecture.
Exactly. We're looking at how the Kremlin's ambition to build this Orwellian digital gulag kind of accidentally morphed into a chaotic cyberpunk dystopia, where absolutely anyone's data is up for sale.
And it's a crucial distinction. When most people think of an authoritarian state's digital landscape, they immediately go to a very specific cultural touchstone.
Right. Usually George Orwell's 1984.
Yeah.
Exactly. The idea of the digital gulag. You picture this terrifying vision where the state is an all-seeing eye.
Yeah, like they hand you a device, they dictate exactly what you are allowed to see on it, and they just monitor every single keystroke.
Right. It implies this perfect, frictionless top-down control. It basically assumes the state is omnipotent.
And what's fascinating here is that Zakharov argues this model is completely wrong for understanding what is actually happening in Russia right now.
Yeah, if you look at the mechanics of this system, he proposes a totally different model. He calls it Russian cyberpunk.
I love that phrase.
Right. Think less 1984 and more Blade Runner or The Matrix.
I really want to dig into that framing. Like, cyberpunk, what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, in a cyberpunk reality, you absolutely still have a powerful authoritarian state, but they are not the only player on the board.
Right.
And they certainly aren't omnipotent. The state is forced to constantly compete against massive independent tech corporations, deeply entrenched organized crime syndicates, highly corrupt insiders, and rogue resistance fighters.
So it's messy.
It is incredibly messy. It's decentralized in the worst possible ways.
And the evidence he provides for this cyberpunk reality completely shatters that digital gulag myth. Let's take facial recognition.
Oh, yeah, that's a great example.
Right, because everyone talks about Moscow's facial recognition system, which is undeniably one of the most extensive in the world. It rivals systems in major Chinese cities.
Sure.
And the assumption is that it's this nationwide net tracking everyone. But Zakharov points out that if you drive just 100 kilometers outside of the capital, the system basically vanishes.
Completely vanishes, which makes perfect sense when you look at the underlying mechanics.
How so?
Well, maintaining a high bandwidth, low latency network of 4K surveillance cameras requires massive, expensive server infrastructure.
Oh, and constant maintenance.
Exactly. And that exists in a wealthy metropolis like Moscow. But in a provincial town, the local government simply doesn't have the budget or even the technical capacity to uphold that kind of grid.
Wow.
Yeah, even in St. Petersburg, the second largest city, it only covers about half the area. In other major cities, it's restricted strictly to transport hubs. So the state's reach is severely limited by basic economics.
That makes total sense. And those limits extend to the internet itself? The state officially labeled Meta an extremist organization, right?
Right, they did.
Yet the source notes it took them 3 entire years to actually take technical action against WhatsApp, which somehow remained the most popular messaging app in the country the whole time.
It's wild. And even more surprisingly, YouTube has been officially blocked for over a year and a half.
Right.
And yet it still remains the fourth most visited social network in Russia.
It just highlights a massive vulnerability in top-down control. Like, you can pass a law blocking a site, but actually severing the complex web of IP addresses without breaking the rest of the country's internet. That's a logistical nightmare.
It really is.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because they didn't just try to block things, right? They tried to build state-approved alternatives.
They did. They created a platform called VK Video.
Right, hoping to force all the Russian content creators to migrate over. The authoritarian thinking was like, if we build the walls and shut the gates, they'll have no choice but to come to our platform.
But it completely failed.
Just tanked. And why did it fail? It wasn't just a lack of marketing.
No, it was a failure of the underlying code.
Exactly. The algorithms were terrible. From what I understand, political compliance literally ruined the code.
Yeah, the state designed the algorithm to artificially boost politically safe, sterile, state-approved content.
And suppress anything organic or edgy.
Right. But social media platforms thrive on organic user engagement. Comments, shares, watch time.
Yeah, so because the algorithm forced boring content into user feeds, viewers just left.
And with no viewers, the creators couldn't monetize their channels.
Yeah.
Their revenue just plummeted.
So what did they do? They just stayed on the officially blocked YouTube using VPNs because the YouTube algorithm actually rewarded them for making things people wanted to watch.
It perfectly illustrates that the state can mandate a platform, but they cannot magically mandate a functioning, organic, digital economy to support it. People will always find a way to route around the damage.
It really shifts how you visualize the whole system. Like, if I can try out an analogy here.
Go for it.
It's like assuming the digital state is this impenetrable, heavily guarded fortress. You picture high, smooth walls and sweeping spotlights.
Right.
But when you walk up and look closely, it's actually a bustling, leaky bazaar.
Yeah.
The walls are crumbling, and the guards who are supposed to be protecting the fortress are actually standing out front, actively selling the keys to the highest bidder.
That is exactly what is happening. And if the state is a leaky bazaar, we have to look at who is running the stalls and what exactly is being sold.
Because the inventory here is human lives.
Right.
But I'm struggling to understand the logistics here. We hear about these massive data aggregators, particularly one mentioned in the source called Glazboga.
Which translates to the eye of God.
Eye of God, right.
Yeah.
This platform fuels a market known as Proviv. What is Proviv, mechanically speaking?
Proviv is basically the practice of buying up-to-date, highly specific, targeted information on an individual.
Okay.
We aren't just talking about buying a leaked password or a phone number. Through these services, you can buy a massive dossier. It includes their friends, their family members, all of their registered assets, their current bank account balances, every physical address they've ordered a package to, their train and plane ticket histories, and even mandatory hotel registries.
Wait, hotel registries?
Yes, which, as Zakharov notes, are frequently used to expose extramarital affairs. You can track exactly who stayed in what room and when.
Wait, hold on. This is where I have to push back a little, or at least express my disbelief.
Okay.
You would think, okay, maybe the average, everyday citizen is exposed to this, but surely the elites, the people at the very top of this authoritarian system, have a protective bubble around their data.
You'd think they have bespoke security.
Exactly.
You would think so, but the source explicitly details that they don't. The vulnerability goes all the way to the top.
That is just wild to me. The source highlights that you can literally buy the personal data of Vladimir Putin's closest associates, people like Igor Sechin or Alexei Miller.
Yeah, you can buy the physical address and phone number of Putin's own daughter.
And Zakharov even notes that for just 100 rubles, which is roughly €1 single, you can access phone company records to see exactly which assistant called the powerful Security Council Secretary Nikolai Patrushev on January 1st to wish him a Happy New Year.
Yep.
€1. Come on, how is that possible? If the state is so authoritarian, how on earth can they fail to protect the president's own inner circle?
It comes down to the core structural contradiction of the Russian system, as outlined in the interview.
Which is?
Well, the state has an absolute insatiable appetite for data hoarding. They are constantly forcing the creation of unified, centralized databases.
Like the COVID electronic passes during the pandemic.
Exactly. Or mandatory hotel registries, centralized medical records in Moscow. They legally mandate the collection of everything, but they provide absolutely abysmal technical, and operational protection for the data they collect.
So it's all gathered in one massive centralized place, but the vault door is basically made of cardboard.
Precisely. And the real vulnerability isn't just the software, it's the wetware.
The people.
Right, the people guarding that vault are fundamentally compromised. You have an army of low-level bureaucrats and employees, police officers at local precincts, tax workers, bank clerks.
And they have access.
Direct credentialed access to these massive databases
Yeah.
as part of their daily jobs. But they are paid incredibly meager salaries.
So the economic incentive to be corrupt is just overwhelming.
Exactly. When an anonymous buyer on Telegram offers a local police officer, say, 40,000 to 50,000 rubles.
Which is roughly 430 to 540 euros.
Right, to perform a single Provis search and extract a specific target's data. The temptation is huge. It might be an entire month's salary for 5 minutes of typing.
But surely the risk is massive. Like, what happens to these clerks if they get caught selling the highly sensitive data of millions of people?
That is one of the most staggering mechanics of this whole ecosystem. In the vast majority of cases in private organizations or low-level state roles, the worst punishment they face is simply getting fired quietly.
Are you serious? Just fired?
Yeah, the organization just wants the problem to go away without a public scandal.
Yeah.
Or if it does go to court, they might get a suspended sentence.
Why so lenient?
Because of the bureaucracy. To truly prosecute a rogue clerk criminally, the justice system would have to formally identify and notify all the thousands of victims whose data was leaked in that specific batch.
Oh, wow.
Imagine a precinct captain having to do the paperwork for 10,000 victims just to put away one corrupt clerk.
They'd never do it.
It is a bureaucratic nightmare they simply refuse to undertake. So you have a massive financial incentive to sell the data and almost zero actual deterrent stopping you.
Okay. Knowing that underpaid officials sell individual searches explains a daily trickle of information, right? A few targeted hits here and there.
Sure.
But it doesn't quite explain the massive ocean-sized floods of data that are available on these Telegram bots. How did we go from back alley briefcases to basically an Amazon Prime-style delivery system for blackmail?
The mechanics of these leaks have evolved dramatically. Back in the early 2000s, corrupt employees used to literally download databases onto physical CD-ROMs.
And sell them at physical electronic markets in Moscow.
Exactly. It was largely a business-to-business model for private investigators or corporate security services. But the advent of Telegram bots changed the entire architecture.
Right, because suddenly anyone with a smartphone could become a buyer. But how do the bots actually work? How do they have everything?
Well, these aggregators, like Glassboga, act as massive, automated search engines for stolen data. The creators write scripts that continuously crawl the dark web, downloading every single new leak that appears.
Whether it's a pizza delivery database, a hospital registry, a taxi app leak.
Exactly. The bot then indexes all of this disparate information, usually anchoring it around a unique identifier like your phone number.
And that's where the stitching happens. The source gives a great example of this.
Yeah, the Yandex.ita leak.
Right. Say there was a massive data breach from the food delivery service Yandex.ita back in 2022. That leak provides a digital snapshot of exactly where you lived, what you ate, and your phone number in 2022.
Right.
But then there's a separate leak from the Moscow City Hall medical system, EMIS, in 2024. The Telegram bot automatically cross-references those two completely different leaks.
It's totally automated.
Yeah. It notes, this person changed their physical address between 2022 and 2024, but they kept the exact same phone number. It builds an automated, constantly updating timeline of your life.
It creates a dynamic profile out of static leaks. And it goes beyond just databases. Yeah, for between $300 and $400, you can pay a corrupt insider to pull a person's camera-tracked location data covering an entire 2-month period. It maps exactly where they walk every day.
That is terrifying. But here's where it gets really interesting, though, because petty corruption is only half the story.
Right.
The source points out that the 2022 war in Ukraine drastically accelerated this descent into cyberpunk chaos by introducing a new, highly motivated actor. Hacktivists engaged in cyber warfare.
Yeah, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this changes the motive entirely.
Exactly.
Ukrainian hackers began actively breaching massive, highly sensitive Russian state systems. And unlike the corrupt tax clerks, these hackers aren't doing it for profit.
They don't want to sell the data quietly on the dark web.
No, they want to weaponize transparency. They just dump it publicly to expose the system.
The source mentions the FSB, Russia's domestic intelligence agency. The hackers breached their Cordon database, which tracks all border crossings.
Which is incredibly sensitive.
Right. Suddenly, the names, companions, and sometimes biometric photos of everyone crossing the border were just out there free for anyone to download.
And the real-world consequences of this cyber warfare are profound. There's a haunting example in the source that really illustrates the mechanism of how this data is used.
The story about the American, right?
Yeah. The son of a CIA deputy director who was tragically killed fighting in the Donbass, the eastern region of Ukraine, where heavy fighting has been concentrated.
The Russians even erected a statue at the site where he died.
Right, but his identity was a mystery. How did investigative journalists figure out exactly who he was?
I read this part, and the methodology is brilliant. They didn't have a spy on the inside.
No, not at all.
They just used the data dumps. Specifically, they looked at the hacked IMIA's medical information system from Moscow City Hall. The journalists simply noticed a strange cluster in the data.
Yeah, a bunch of foreign passports were all registering at the exact same room number.
At a military recruitment center in Moscow.
Yes. Because the medical system tracked their mandatory health registrations, the journalists were able to pinpoint that specific room.
Wow.
And once they found that room in the database, they could cross-reference the names registered there with leaked border crossing data and casualty reports coming out of Donbass.
Unbelievable.
By simply looking at the collateral damage of a hack, they unmasked a highly sensitive identity.
Think about that for a second, to you listening right now. Imagine every online food order you ever made, perfectly combined with your highly confidential medical records, your passport details, your border crossings.
Just dumped online.
Yeah, for the entire world to download and search through, simply as collateral damage in a geopolitical cyber war.
It is the complete eradication of privacy, which leads us to a critical question. In a reality where everyone's life is exposed on accessible Telegram bots, who is actually exploiting this?
Right. What does it feel like to live in this reality?
It's definitely a dual-use reality.
Yeah.
On one hand, you have the resistance. Investigative journalists are primary beneficiaries.
They have to be.
The source points out that journalists, like Christo Grozev, use these exact same data leaks and Proviv markets to bypass the state's wall of secrecy.
Because the state refuses to release official records.
Exactly. The only way to hold power accountable is to buy the leaked data on the black market. This is exactly how journalists uncovered the identities of the Samara police officers who illegally leaked the travel information related to the poisoning of opposition leader Alexei Navalny.
Wow.
In a strange, twisted way, the corruption of the data market is the only thing allowing for any political transparency.
So what does this all mean for the average person who isn't an investigative journalist or a political dissident?
Well, that brings us to the much darker side of the equation.
Right, an absolute uncontrolled epidemic of scams targeting ordinary working-class citizens.
The scale of the fraud is difficult to comprehend, and it is steeped in geopolitical irony. Since 2014, the hybrid warfare between the two nations has spawned massive industrialized call centers located in Ukraine.
Entirely dedicated to defrauding Russian citizens. And we have to talk about the psychological terror of this. Because they are incredibly effective. They aren't just cold calling and guessing your name.
No, when a scammer calls a victim, they are armed with perfect data from these aggregators.
Imagine picking up the phone and the person on the other end already knows your first and last name, your exact bank balance down to the penny, the physical address where your children go to school, and what your last major purchase was.
It makes the scam incredibly convincing and deeply intimidating.
Exactly.
Furthermore, the scammers and their victims speak the exact same language. The accents are often indistinguishable.
Right. A scammer sitting in a call center in Ukraine might sound exactly like someone from Krasnodar or Stavropol in southern Russia.
Add to that the advent of number spoofing technology, which became widespread around 2019.
Right. Number spoofing allows a call originating in Ukraine to artificially route itself so that it displays a local trusted Russian number on the victim's caller ID.
It looks like your local bank is calling you.
But the deep irony here is how the war completely insulates the scammers from any consequences.
It creates a zone of total impunity. Think about it mechanically. If a scammer in Brazil targets someone in Portugal, the Portuguese police can simply call the Brazilian police, share the data, and coordinate an arrest.
Sure.
But because of the war, can you imagine the Russian police calling the Ukrainian police in a city like Dnipro to ask for help shutting down a call center?
It's physically and politically impossible. The source notes that when Ukrainian law enforcement has encountered these call centers in the past, the scammers' defense is essentially, why are you stopping us? We are only targeting the inhabitants of the aggressor country. We are economically draining the enemy.
The scam relies on three unshakable pillars. The dark web data leaks to target victims, the technical means to spoof numbers, and the absolute inability of law enforcement to cross borders to stop them.
And speaking of law enforcement, we have to talk about the ultimate paradox of this entire deep
But
dive.
this is the best part.
With this massive black market of data aggregators weaponizing information against citizens, you would expect the Russian police to be throwing all of their resources into shutting down tools like Glasboga.
You would absolutely expect that. It makes the state look weak.
But the reality is the exact opposite.
Yeah, the official Russian Ministry of Interior Police databases are so notoriously inefficient, so siloed, and so poorly integrated across different departments that it's practically useless for an investigator trying to solve a fast-moving case.
So what do the cops do? They turn to the black market.
Yes.
A survey by a researcher at the Ministry of the Interior's own university found that in some regions, a staggering 80% of police officers were caught officially using the illegal Glasboga tool to do their own daily police work.
It's amazing. Because the Telegram bot has squished everything into one easy-to-search interface, it's faster for a cop to use the criminal aggregator than their own secure terminal.
They were literally sending physical letters on official ministry letterhead, asking the black market aggregator for unlimited premium subscription access so they could solve crimes.
It is the defining poetic image of Russian cyberpunk. The state's own enforcers abandoning the state's broken billion-dollar tools to rely on a criminal black market telegram bot just to do their basic jobs.
It is truly staggering. To try and synthesize this incredible journey, Zakharov uses a brilliant closing metaphor in the source to describe the state's futile attempts to fix this mess.
Right, the mosquito metaphor.
Yes. The government tries to stop these massive systemic data leaks by using crude, blunt internet blocking tools, trying to ban WhatsApp, or block specific IP addresses. And Zakharov says it is like killing a mosquito in the kitchen with a stick. By the time you reach it, all the dishes will be broken, and the mosquito might very well get out alive.
That imagery perfectly captures the collateral damage of their approach. They destroy their own infrastructure trying to swat a bug they can't catch. And to ground this for you, the listener, it's helpful to contrast this cyberpunk reality with what we experience in the West. We often talk about Harvard professor Shoshana Zuboff's concept of surveillance capitalism.
Right, the idea that massive tech companies, Google, Meta, Amazon, know everything about you, but their ultimate goal is corporate profiling. They want to predict your behavior so they can sell you a product.
Exactly. It's invasive, but it has a specific commercial boundary. The Russian cyberpunk reality is fundamentally different and, frankly, much more volatile.
Yeah.
It's not just a corporation that knows you. It means anyone can know you. The state, a scammer in another country, a neighbor with a grudge, or a journalist.
Your data isn't just used to sell you things. It is actively weaponized in a chaotic, open-air bazaar.
And again, as we noted at the top of the show, we are looking at this strictly through the analytical lens provided by the source material.
Right. We aren't endorsing any political ideology, but rather marveling at the bizarre structural reality of this digital environment.
It really is a profound shift in how we think about privacy, infrastructure, and state power. You think you're building a fortress, and you end up building a glass house where everyone have a rock.
Wow, well said.
And this raises an important question, one that extends far beyond the borders of Russia, and something for you to mull over after this deep dive ends.
What's that?
If state-mandated mass data collection inevitably leads to total public exposure simply due to basic human corruption, underpaid clerks trying to make rent, and unavoidable cyber vulnerabilities, is any centralized digital society destined to become a cyberpunk dystopia, regardless of what political ideology the government holds?